Herr, can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you.
Okay, good. All right, we're going to get ready to get started here. Are you recording? Oh, good. Yep, we're ready.
All right, good evening, everyone. I will call the March 25th, 2024 meeting of the Newtown Township Board of Supervisors to order. I will note that the board did meet in executive session at 6 p.m. where we discussed with regards to litigation matters, the timing of conditional use application, and the resolution of non-conforming lot case. Additionally, with regards to personnel matters, we discussed an employee resignation notice, discussion of employee manual, and seasonal work schedule. With that being said, Mr. Neese, please call the roll.
Mr.
Here.
Altieri,
Here.
Ms. Roberts Lightcap,
Here.
Mr. Russo. Here. Ms. Chanlis.
Here.
Mr. San Francesco.
Here.
Your solicitor, engineer, and manager are here.
Thank you very much, Mr. Neese. We'll now move down to the moment of silence and the Pledge of Allegiance. And we'll stand for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, now we'll move down to section 5 agenda. 5.1, can I get a motion to approve the agenda as presented?
So moved.
Second.
Motion was made by Supervisor Russo, seconded by Supervisor Roberts Lightcap. Is there any board discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Section 6, public comment for agenda items only. If there's any members of the public who have anything that they wish to say with regards to an agenda item, please go up to the podium, state your name and address for the record. Janet, if you want, you can also wait until we get to that resolution or the proclamation. You want to wait until you get to that? Okay. Anyone else from the public? Okay. Seeing none, we'll move down to minutes 7.1. Can I get a motion to approve the minutes from the March 11, 2024 meeting?
So moved. Second.
Motion was made by Supervisor San Francesco, seconded by Supervisor Chanlis. Is there any board discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Section 8, presentations, 8.1, Eagle Scout presentation by Mr. Doug Agatone. Floor is yours, sir. Just make sure that microphone's up when you get up there.
Is it good?
Is it lit?
Yep, it's good.
There you go.
Good evening. I'm Doug Agatone. I'm from Troop 315. And I'm here to talk about my Eagle Scout project. I'm building a flagpole in Drexel Lodge Park. It's right now Drexel Lodge Park has no flagpole. And as you know, before sports games and events, do the pledge and everything like that, and that can't be carried out right now because there isn't one there. I'm also building a light on the pavilion to shine on the flag at night, so that the flag code is properly carried out there. And I am building or putting up a sign about flag etiquette and about where to dispose of old and tattered flags that need to be retired.
Did you walk through this whole project with George? Okay. I assumed you did. I just wanted to make sure.
And for the record, that was a yes.
Sorry.
All right. Is there any other questions from the board? So Doug, when do you expect to start this project?
Late April.
Late April. All right, perfect. Well, if you let the board know when you're doing that, we tend to like to come to these Eagle Scout projects and lend a hand. Supervisor San Francisco doesn't pick up too many shovels, so it'll be good to see him sweat a little bit. He's a computer guy, so a little manual labor will be good for him.
That's right.
Do you need a vote, or how do you want to handle this?
I think because there's two things. One is it's something on a township property that's more like a permanent structure. I would think you probably should go ahead and vote on it, as well as the fact that there's a sign being put on it. I think you would want to do that.
I'd like to make a motion to approve, Doug Agatone as Eagle Scout project proposal of an erection of a flagpole with a sign with the flag etiquette and a light shining on the flag.
Second.
Motion was made by Supervisor Roberts Lightcap, seconded by Supervisor Russo. Is there any further board discussion?
Just make sure that that the flagpole does not fall on that other sign, because that other sign was made by my son for his Eagle Scout project, so, you know.
No pressure.
So, yeah. So we're very excited to have more projects
Thank you.
at Drexel Lodge Park, so.
Thank you.
Any other board discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, congratulations.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Should I leave it on?
You're good.
Thank you.
We'll now move down to 8.2, the 2022 audit presentation from the appointed auditor, Maillie LLP, Mr. Chris Herr, CPA. I
So
believe he's.
just so everybody knows, Chris is online and he'll give us the presentation from online. If you'll hold that up, please.
All right, thank you very much. Happy to be here tonight to present the 2022 financial statements. I'll try to be brief, and in order to do that, I do have a 4 or 5 page handout here that I'm going to go through, and I'll dive right in. First part here, the way I always frame it is the financial statement is the township's, even though we compile it. We do that based on information that we received from the township. The only thing in there that's really Maillie's is the opinion on the financial, which is what's summarized here, sort of the results of the audit. So our auditor's report, our opinion on the financial is an unmodified opinion. That's what you want to have. It's the best opinion you have on your financials. What that means is that in our opinion, they're free of any material misstatement. They comply with GAAP. That's generally accepted accounting principles. They comply with all GASB pronouncements. That's the Governmental Accounting Standards Board that creates the rules that are specific to government. And there's no scope limitations. We come in with a very lengthy list of everything that we want to see as part of the audit, all sorts of documents, schedules, bank statements, invoices, W-2s, everything you can think of that pertains to finance. And we did receive everything that we needed in order to carry out the audit. So that's a big positive there, clean opinion. Non-compliance, no instances of non-compliance material to the financials were noted. And then findings, we did have one finding coming out of the audit. We did issue what's known as a SAS 115 letter or a management letter. And that finding had to do with year-end accruals. So during the audit, we noted that for several receivable and payable accounts, prior year balances weren't reversed and or current year balances were not recorded, which has an impact on revenues and expenses. And we also issued a SAS 114 letter, which is a standard communication to governance. In the last 3 or 4 pages, there are all the adjustments we had to make during the audit, many of which had to do with either recording year-end receivables or payables, or I know in one case we had to reverse. There was a large payable entry that was booked twice. So there was just a lot of corrections that we had to make during the audit process to accruals, and we did issue that as a finding. We wanted to make sure that everyone was aware of that, so corrective action can be taken in the future to hopefully mitigate that. In the next page, we get into some of the financial results. This is some of the estimates that are in the financial. So your net pension liability, your police plan, and your non-uniform plan both went from being overfunded in 2021 to underfunded in 2022. Your police plan was 119% funded in 2021, down to 93% funded at the end of 22. The reason for that was about a 2.9% investment loss, worked out to about a 16% loss on investments. That was extraordinarily typical of every municipality that we audited in 2022. Every plan that we saw, the investments took a beating from the markets, typically anywhere from 15 to 20% losses we saw. So you're on the low end of that, which is a good thing. And also a lot of that's since already bounced back in 23 and 24. The non-uniform plan, same thing. It was 115% funded the year before. It's down to 90% funded. Investment loss of $680,000. It was about a 15.7% loss. So again, Unfortunately, all plans saw that loss. It's not unusual for pension plans. They are still healthily funded, 93% and 90%. And the other thing I'd point out is that does come after 3 years of, I think the 3 preceding years were like 12, 15, and 20% positive returns. So we always want to look at those plans long term, and over the long term, they've done really well, other than this off year in 22. The minimum municipal obligations, those are the amounts that you're required to contribute to the plans. The police pension plan was $566,000, went down to $212,000 in 2022. That's a product of it being well funded and the calculations reflecting that, which is why the contribution dropped. Non-uniform plan, pretty similar year on year, around $160,000. Your net OPEB liability, this is your other post-employment benefits. So this is post-employment benefits other than pension. Liability was $3.5 million in 2021, down to $3.2 million in 2022. This is an unfunded liability, unlike the pensions where you're putting money aside into trust. The OPEB is very much standalone. The reason that liability decreased is because of the actuarial discount rate used, which oftentimes will reflect interest rates, market interest rates. So that did increase from about 2.25 to 4.31%, and that did have the impact of a $300,000 to $400,000 loss or decrease in your OPEB liability. Last thing we have there, capital assets. Total cost of township assets, and this is everything: infrastructure, buildings, vehicles, equipment, $45 million. Depreciation was $1.3 million. You also had about $1.3 million of additions, mostly roads and stormwater improvements, some vehicles and equipment. But effectively, anything you lost in depreciation, you put right back into capital assets in investment. Accumulated depreciation on those assets is $17.9 million. So you're about 40% of the way through the life of your assets, which is very good for any of the municipalities that I work with. The next page is some of the revenue and expense breakdowns for the year 21 compared to 22. So the first column there, that first row is your taxes. Orange is last year, blue is this year. So your taxes are down, went from about 8.5 million down to 8 million. While your real estate taxes were up about 400,000, that was offset by about a $900,000 decrease in transfer taxes. Taxes went from about 1.9 down to about 1 million. I think that was expected after an awful lot of activity in 21, 20, and 19, that eventually things would start to slow down there, and they did. Similarly, license and permits also decreased. That was $1.8 million last year, or in 21, went down to 1.4 million in 2022. And that was all driven by a slowdown in building, electrical, plumbing, and HVAC permits. Again, I think that was sort of expected after a lot of activity in the prior years. And then intergovernmental revenues increased, went from about 760,000 up to 1.4 million. Really two things driving that increase. There was a recycling grants received about 100,000. Those don't necessarily come in annually, so there was no recycling grants in 21, and then you had a couple in 22. I can't remember if that was 1 year's worth or two, but they do come in sporadically. And the other big change there was ARPA funds. You would obviously receive ARPA funds through the federal government in relation to the COVID-19 pandemic. You had spent 460,000 of your COVID-19 money on stormwater. So that because you spent 460, then you get to recognize that revenue that you had received in ARPA funding. Down under expenditures, this is kind of all over the place, and most of this is related to discretionary spending. So highways and streets, that was $2 million last year. It's up to about 2.7 million this year. The big change is that stormwater spending, ARPA spending that I mentioned in 22 compared to 21. Public safety went from 6.2 million down to 5.3 million. The reason for that was the fire truck purchased in 21. That was a $1.1 million truck. And that was offset by just some of your typical, salary, insurance type increases in public safety. General government, again, down a little bit, 1.3 million down to about 1.2. There was about $150,000 of building and IT renovations in 21 that didn't repeat in 22. So if you take out sort of the extraordinary capital spending, grant spending from year to year, pretty stable, with your day-to-day expenses in those areas. Bonds and notes payable, this is your long-term debt, went from 13 million down to 12 million, and that's just, you had $1 million of scheduled principal payment. And then the last table on this page is fund balance. So this is, if you look at your funds, if you took your assets, you paid off all your liabilities, this is what you would have left. And this oftentimes is sort of the chart that really speaks to financial health overall. So that blue line is your general fund. And you can see that's going down a little bit, not a big decrease, not a worrisome decrease, but it went from 5.8 million down to 5.3, and this year it's at 5.1. Still, it's a good fund balance, it's a healthy fund balance. The orange line is everything else. And at the end of the year, it's about 11 million. It went from about 10 million, the last 2 years, it kind of went up about $1 million in 22. Out of that 11 million, 10 million of that's capital. And then about a $250,000 is liquid fuels. There's a $250,000 is stormwater there, but most of that's your capital. And the reason that line kind of arced up was because the general fund transferred some surplus over to there, which is part of the reason I'm not worried about that blue line going down, because, really the orange line went up because the blue line went down. And that's all just discretionary transfers funding future capital projects. So overall, I look at that graph and again, that to me speaks to stability. It's a pretty good trend over the past 3 years. The last page is just something I put in for all my board presentations. I always like to kind of give a really quick sort of synopsis of what we're doing in the audit behind the scenes. So, with the balance sheet, we're confirming a lot of your cash directly with banks. Your accounts receivable, we're looking at the subsequent year, making sure that those receivables were valid and they came in. On the liability side, we're confirming your debt with outside banks and loaner agencies. Accounts payable, again, we're looking at the subsequent year, making sure those were valid liabilities at year end. We confirm a lot of your revenues, your tax revenues with tax collectors, grants with grantor agencies. And then we're kind of left with expenses, which are oftentimes the hardest thing to audit, which is what this page covers. What we do is we get the general ledger detail from your business office. And what that is it's a report of every individual transaction in every account of every fund of the township. So whether it's, a purchase of, a stamp for, I don't even know what stamps are, or, $1 million purchase, every individual thing is in there. We do a few things. We do a Benford's Law test. Benford's Law says in any randomly occurring population of numbers, the first digit will be 1 about 30% of the time, 2, 22% of the time, and that works its way down to about 9, 5% of the time. So this is an actual representation of, 4,000 or 5,000 transactions in the township. And you can see it follows that curve perfectly. And then what we'll do is we'll run it 2 digits. And again, look for any unusual spikes or decreases in activity and aim our testing there. At the bottom of that page there, you'll see some other data analytics that we do. We do pivot table analysis. We'll lay out your expenses month to month by individual account, look for any unusual increases or decreases in activity, and aim our testing at those areas that seem unusual. We'll do predictive analytics before we even start your audit. We'll take the last 4 or 5 years of data, look at any trends, come up with what we think is going to happen in 2022 in this case. And once we get the actual numbers, if our expectations differ from what actually happened, again, we'll test those areas and make sure we understand what's happening. We do W-2 analysis of all employees to make sure there's no unusual increases, decreases in pay. We look at journal entry adjustments made in the system. We look at your vendors. And the idea is that we're not just looking at the same, 5 or 10 expense accounts or 5 or 10 vendors every year. It is a risk-based approach to auditing the expenses. We kind of let the data take us wherever we go. So again, just kind of wanted to give an idea behind the curtain of what's happening with the audit and our process. So that's really all I had. That's kind of the highlights from the 22 audit. I know I went really, really fast, but be happy to field any questions if there are any.
I have a couple. What I should have done at the beginning of this is for those in the audience and for those that are watching this at home. So the way that, and Steve, correct me if anything that I'm saying here is not necessarily phrased properly, but the way that the township is structured, in addition to the Board of Supervisors, where the 5 of us are elected, and then the township staff, there are 3 elected auditors to the township. In addition to those 3 elected auditors, the board appoints what we refer to as either an appointed auditor or an independent auditor, and that rotates out usually every 5 years, give or take. And with accounting practices, we change that auditor up. It is Maillie and has been for, I guess, the past couple of years. And so the independent auditor comes in and it's like another look at the books, in addition to the 3 elected auditors that we have here in the township. So he's a completely independent individual that comes in here and looks at this. So Chris, I appreciate that overview. I guess the first question I have is with regards to best practices that you would recommend implementing for the next audit.
Yeah, I mean, I would look at our finding as probably being the number one thing to address for next year's audit. I know I've spoken with the township manager about that, with Steve about that. Anytime we issue a finding, that's significant, and that's something that we want to address. I don't issue those lightly. I'm not averse to issuing them, but when I do issue them, that is something that we think is a big deal, and that's something that needs to be resolved next year. So I think the best practice going into the 23 audit would be, really making sure that year-end receivables and payables are accurate, that those accounts have been adjusted, and that's going to also make sure that the related revenues and expenses are also properly stated. I think that's by far the biggest deal going into the 23 audit.
Perfect. With regards to our financial health compared to other municipalities that you have experience with, can you just kind of touch on that or your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a little hard to compare municipalities to municipalities, simply because one municipality might be, you guys have about $10 million in capital projects. Another municipality might have 30 or 40 million because they have a big project or a building they're working on. Usually the ratio that I'll look at is, what is your fund balance in your general fund compared to annual expenses? So your fund balance in the general fund is $5 million. Your annual expenses is 9.3. So we're talking about roughly 55%, which is equivalent to maybe 6.5 months of expenses. So what that means is, if you had no money coming in the general fund, you'd be able to pay your bills for 6.5 months. That's a really good ratio. Usually the standard minimum, you don't want to be under 2, simply because, especially with real estate taxes being so significant there, oftentimes January and February can be a little bit of a dead zone there for collection on that. You don't really start bringing in that revenue till March. So you always want to have at least 2 months to get through January and February before your real estate taxes kick in. Oftentimes I'll be at municipalities, they might be at 3 or 4, but some might be at 9 or 10. It really depends. But 6 to me is really healthy. When I look at that ratio and it's 50%, to me that's very solid.
Perfect. And then I think you sort of answered this with the answer of your hesitation to compare municipality to municipality, but given your experience in auditing other municipalities, are there other concerns? Are there any concerns or that you consistently see in other municipalities?
Yeah, I mean, internal controls is always a big deal. That's something that we do look at as part of the audit. I really didn't mention that. That's something else that, you know, when we come up with findings, when we try to determine findings in an audit, there's really two things I look at. One is what sort of adjustments did we have? And the other is internal controls and how are things working? And internal controls are your policies over, you know, how are you processing receipts? How are you processing disbursements, payroll, journal entries, bank reconciliation, really any of those big overarching processes over financial, really anything to do with your financials. You know, you guys have a really good computer system there, a very good financial software system there where a lot of that approval process is sort of built in. It's very hard to override that. So, you know, typically that is one of the other things that I look at all my municipalities, and it's always a concern. But I will say you guys have a really good system of internal controls there and processes, and a lot of that's aided by your financial software. So, not too much else to recommend on that front.
Perfect. Any other questions from the board? I will note that we do have the chairman of the elected auditors, Mr. Steve Warner, is here. Steve, I don't know if you want to add anything to this.
Not really, but no.
Thanks for being here.
Yeah, we were well engaged with Chris this time throughout the audit cycle, I'd say comparatively to other years as well. Worked through the finding he had, I think significantly. We have a good group of on the audit committee experienced CPAs, people who work in audit in the industry, and have somewhat, I would say, somewhat good feedback and a plan to fix that for 2023. And have kind of thought about how often we'll be meeting to kind of have a good schedule, getting the audit in good shape and hopefully execute it rather quickly as well. But no concerns, and agree with all the feedback Chris had as well.
And you guys have reviewed the audit report as well?
We met with Chris a few weeks ago to go through the audit report and give any feedback we had. You know, again, just kind of voice concerns if we have on behalf of the township and things like that.
Thanks, Steve. Okay. Do we need, I know that we accepted last week or 2 weeks ago, the report. Do we need to do any, there's no agenda item for this tonight. It's just the presentation.
I think it'd be just helpful at this point if you went ahead and just adopted the audit as presented. In that way, it's official. You accepted it last time, so I could distribute it, but this would be your official adopting now that you've had a chance to review it yourselves.
Okay. Before we do that, because it was a presentation, is there any public comment on it? Okay, seeing none, is there a motion?
I'd like to make a motion. I'd like to make a motion to adopt the audit as presented, the 2022 audit as presented tonight by Maillie LLP, Chris Herr, CPA.
Second.
Motion was made by Supervisor Roberts Lightcap, seconded by Supervisor Chanlis. Is there any board discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carries unanimously. All right, thank you very much, Chris. Appreciate it.
Thanks. Have a great evening. And if any questions come up after, please feel free to reach out.
Well, Chris, the only question I have is with such strong financial ratings, when are you moving into Newtown? Seems like a great place to, seems like a great place to live, work, and raise a family, huh?
It really does. It's a strong financial. I'll talk to the wife about it.
All right, there you go. There you go.
Take care, everyone.
Thanks, Chris. We're now moved down to section 9, reports 9.1, report from the police department. Chief Chris Lunn, I don't believe he's here, so there's nothing to add or supplement to his report.
I think, Robert Lightcap and I have some concerns. And we want to know how they're going to be addressed.
Okay.
We want him to reach out to Ulta. And we want them to get a security guard. This is ridiculous. Every report, just robbery after robbery after robbery. They don't call until after they're gone. They don't do anything about it. And now we're also concerned about the hotel, the new hotel. They're just sort of having these weddings, and we're not providing security guards for, you know, people at these weddings to come back to the hotel afterwards. So we want a plan in place of what we're gonna do to address these items before they become, commonplace, which Ulta is already more than commonplace.
And I know that Chief did say that Alta finally installed cameras at the front door, I think, and I know that Chief has been talking to them. But I'm just nervous. It's kind of scary to think that it's like every other day almost, right? That there's thousands of dollars walking out of there. I guess they don't care, but it could
Someone could get
potentially
seriously hurt.
dangerous. Yeah, dangerous.
And there's, and 99.9% of women or people that frequent that store. And I don't feel comfortable that they don't have any kind of security apparatus install, there to maintain order.
From the hotel, because I think before when the Hilton Garden opened, I think there was some incidences with weddings or events and people were staying over, and now you'll have this second hotel. So maybe, and I know that Chief's always very proactive, but maybe to just encourage conversations with the management of the hotel. Because we can't, it takes up resources and we can't charge them. Am I correct? Mr. Sikora, we can't charge anything, because there's no hotel tax that we can charge, because it would go to the county, but it's our services, the police, the fire company, that kind of a thing. And because I'm sure you guys would get called, even if someone is hurt or whatever, you'll go there because you're right there. And there should be some, I don't know, is there something like that, Chief, that's because it's a lot of people. Now that we've got 2 catering facilities, there have been conversations with anyone?
Can you just do me a favor?
Oh, I'm sorry, that's my fault. That's my fault.
We haven't engaged with anybody in conversation. We anticipate that our call volume is going to go up, which is going to tax us again, like
Mhm.
as far as what we do, but we haven't really sat down and talked to anybody from the hotels or anybody that's building over there either.
Right.
We do pay attention to what's going on, how it's going on, like how it's being constructed, because that'll affect us. But again, we haven't really engaged with anybody, but we anticipate our volume is going to go up significantly, probably.
Mr. Neat, does it make sense to have the police and to get a contact from the developer because Finley is the same caterer. I don't really worry about the caterer, but it's the hotel. And with the fire company being right across from the new catering facility, you might want to think about raising money, charge parking in your parking lot because it's right across the street. Because it's a nonprofit, so I'm not saying anything about taxing or
Yeah, look, I'll have a conversation with the developer and see what we can try to do. I think we're limited, but we'll try to do what we can.
Yeah, at least a conversation, so at least they know what's happening, and because that's tight. That's a tight center, and I hope we're wrong. I hope it'll be fine, but to anticipate. Go ahead, Mike. I'm sorry.
That's it.
Any other questions?
Nope. Thank you.
Perfect. We'll move down to 9.2, report from the fire department. Chief Young, do you have anything to add or supplement to your report? Thank you very much. 9.3, report from the public works director, Mr. Sharrock. Do you have anything to add or supplement to your report? Thank you very much, sir. 9.4, report from the building/codes officer, Mr. Rezchek. I don't know if he's on the call.
Nothing to report.
Thank you very much.
Question.
I have several questions. Andy.
Yes.
Stony Knoll, those are the new townhomes up on,
Single.
single homes, the 17 single homes up there that Nolan's is he building them? Is Ryan Holmes, who's building them?
Holy.
Holy.
So now Poli's coming in, they want to change what was approved by this board. They want to have detached garages in addition to the original.
That
footprint.
is correct.
Yeah, that's got to come back here. Rich, what do you say? Because that's more impervious coverage. It's different than what we approved. Okay, that's got to come back.
Where is it? It was scheduled to go, just so everybody's clear, it was scheduled to originally go to zoning.
Yeah, but
Yeah. Yeah, I
don't care
mean,
what
what,
zoning says, they can say what they want to say, but I want to come back here because that's not what they sold us when he got up here and gave us this big sob story, and then he goes and flips it, and now it's a different product.
What else?
Mr. Russo, what I can tell you is I understand the applications will be for detached accessory garages. I don't have any kind of plan as of yet to the size or the height. But as I understand it, they will be detached and meet all the setback requirements, but they do have to come in for that separate zoning variance because of the
Right.
accessory structure. Yeah, and actually the height will be in conformance with the code that requires special exception because it's going to be in line with the architecture of the roof.
Yeah, but now our code requires to be 25 foot back from the principal structure. So now you have 25 feet of additional driveway, the width of whatever that is, if it's a 2-car detached garage. It could be 15 to 18 feet wide times 25 feet. That's a lot more impervious coverage that we didn't anticipate, we didn't look at, we didn't agree on. That's one.
Well, I would agree with you on that. I don't believe, because they're mostly 2-acre lots, I don't know that they would exceed the allowable impervious by percentage in accordance with the R1.
Okay.
But it would certainly be different than the plan that was approved.
Just to give you, the way it works is what the plan has to come before Mr. Retchek, right? That actually, there's permission to do something, but then there's actual plan to construct something. He does a review. If it triggers land development or an amendment to the land development plan or a zoning problem or a different ordinance is triggered, he does that review and then he refers it around as appropriate. So that won't go unnoticed by Mr. Retchek.
Well, it's different than what we approved, so. Andy, can you explain to me about this house at 591 North Newtown Street Road? Is this a house that Aronimik purchased?
Is it 591 or 571?
Or 591? I don't know. I gotta look it back up. But if there's some house that Aronimik's involved in now, they're gonna put interns in. Is this something they recently purchased?
Yes, I do believe. Yeah, I think it is 591. That property, they purchased a single family home that is along Newtown Street Road, and for the purpose of housing their summer interns. That's the word I'm looking for. Their summer interns, and it would obviously, the number of summer interns would obviously exceed the family definition of 3 unrelated individuals.
Yep.
So that's what I believe their application is for a variance of that family definition to allow their interns to live in that home during the summer months.
Is that gonna require a fire sprinkler and fire alarm?
Well, no, our code exempts, Chapter 88 exempts existing single family homes. And I don't think that by doing this, they would change the actual definition of it being a single family home. They're just asking relief from the family definition to allow more than 3 unrelated individuals
How
to live
would how would this be any different than a fraternity house?
Well, if you remember, we had a similar situation on Main Street, 4 Main, several years ago. And they also came in and requested relief. I don't really recall the outcome. I know that group home's no longer there. But at that time, they had requested the same variance. It was for a higher number of individuals. But right now, I'm not so sure I even can pinpoint for you the exact number they wish to exceed that by.
That was related to an Americans with Disabilities Act and Fair Housing Amendments Act claim. It was
Well, that's true, but they did come in for the variance of the family definition.
Well, the concern I have is.
We had them come in we had them come in to request a reasonable accommodation to the zoning code related to the Americans with Disabilities Act. It was a request for relief, but it wasn't a quote variance. This is different. This is not an Americans with Disabilities Act.
That's correct.
My concern is, Andy, we're having a bunch of young college kids in here for the summer. I mean, we need to be realistic. I mean, at least have a fire alarm in this house. And now it's going off the tax books, so they're not gonna even pay tax on it, so they can easily afford to put in a fire alarm system that protects these kids.
Yeah, I don't know how to answer the question on the
I'd
floor.
like you to look into it and get back to me then.
Yeah, sure, that's not a problem.
I don't need to put you on the spot now, but.
No, that's okay.
I mean.
Yeah, I just wish I had
every
better
fraternity house
information.
I've ever been in has a fire alarm. This is no different. It's a bunch of young, unrelated people living in a house in college in the summer that are gonna look to do whatever they're gonna do. You know, during the day they're working, it's one thing, but when they're not working, they're gonna be hanging out in this house.
Oh, I'm sure you're correct.
Any other questions for Mr.
One
Resuke?
more question.
Just to be clear, right, so it's a zoning variance request, right? So the township can send a representative
Correct.
to the zoning board and either A, oppose the application, or B, well, not oppose it, but seek conditions with respect to a variance.
When's it scheduled for?
April 18th.
I just want to protect,
And we have a supervisor meeting
individuals.
before that, correct? Am I correct on that?
Yes,
Yeah,
I
the
think
8th.
you have one on the
The 8th,
8th.
April 8th. Okay.
I think we should send Rich.
Well, I don't want to make a decision on that right now. Personally, I would rather look at the application. I don't disagree with anything that you're saying right
That's
now.
fine.
But let me look at I think we should all take the opportunity
That's
to look at
fine.
the application and then have a conversation with council.
And then Andy, where are we with portion of the main line and what they're doing over there?
In regard to
Are they done with that renovation or are they coming back for more? What are they doing?
They're before
Well,
zoning.
For what now?
They just were in front of zoning last Thursday night for the parking garage and for, go ahead, Andy, you can. tell
there
us.
was the older new Porsche building is now
Yeah.
going to become Ferrari. And they were also in for a signage package. And they received variance relief from that signage for their signage package. And that would be at 4005 Westchester Pike. And then there were special exception. The applicant came in for special exception approval for the 4019 address, which would be for a public 3-story parking garage. And that application, the
Parking garage.
record's been closed on that application, but a decision hasn't been rendered.
Did we send Rich to go to that? For 3-story parking garage at a car dealer on Newtown? On Westchester
We
Pike?
did not send regs.
That would,
How tall, do you have any idea how tall that garage is, Andy?
It will be under the limit of the zone. They didn't request any relief, so I'm going to say 45 feet. That's the maximum.
Full site plan package, landscaping upgrades and everything?
Well, that'll come with land development. They were simply in for the use.
All right,
You will see that plan when it comes in for land development.
Ferrari dealership, there's a
Thank you.
Porsche dealership, there's another one, Lotus, I think,
McLaren.
and McLaren, so they're not high volume dealers, obviously, because they're such high end. But there's a common place to park these with some greenery on the roof and everything. And it's referred to as public just because it's not one dealership using the garage. It's for the relief for all of the sites, but they have to have easements and stuff. So that's why the record is kind of, why it's not done yet. For zoning only. Once that's done, they got to come back in for land development. So that's all going to be before you. It's going to go to the planning commission. It's going to go to you for land development. If other, things that are not in compliance with the zoning code are identified, they got to go back for zoning relief, but that's,
But to be clear, that parking garage is not requiring a zoning relief.
it needed special because the only
With
thing that
regards to height, let me
required,
just say, with regards to height.
not with, no, there's no zoning relief with respect to height. What it required was because more than one dealership
I
was
understand.
using it. It required that because it's not just one parcel. It's not one parking spot for one parcel. It's being shared. So that requires zoning relief.
Any other questions? Okay. 9.5, report from the finance director, Ms. Bullock. I don't believe that she's on. So there's nothing.
I think she is.
Nothing more to add.
Nothing to add?
No, sir.
9.6, report from the library director, Ms. Caruso. Do you have anything to add or supplement to your report? Thank you very much. 9.7, report from the township engineer, Mr. Johnson. Anything to add or supplement?
Just a quick update. As you might have noticed, the Ellis Avenue speed cushions were installed today by the contractor. So they are wrapping up the project, the speed cushion signage, and then finishing out the grading and getting that all wrapped up. We also have a few agenda items will be Glendale Road.
Eric, I'm sorry, just on that, I noticed the last speed cushion that's got the crosswalk on it. There's gonna be a curb, right? They didn't finish that curb yet.
Are you talking about on the north end? the park
Yes.
side? Yeah, that final end, that still needs to be the final configuration, because that's the new sidewalk, the ramp, and the trail all are connected in there. That
Okay,
is
yeah,
not-
I figured that, but I was like, it doesn't go anywhere.
Yeah, no, that all needs to be
Okay,
connected
great,
still right
thank
there.
you.
And then further down on the agenda, we'll have Glendale Road Storm Sewer Project, the first capital project coming up. Other than that, working on various capital projects and the usual ramp up for the spring.
What are we doing with regards to remediation of those lawns? I know that they put stuff down just to secure everything during the winter months because they kind of got a little delayed in
Correct,
that.
that is, the contractor has a punch list of items need to complete. They had stabilized it just to go into the winter. Now they need to do the final grading, cutting back the slopes, tying it in, and final grass and stabilization of the front yards.
Got it. Perfect. Any other questions for Mr. Johnson? 9.8, report from the township manager, Mr. Neese.
I have nothing.
Nice, look at that. Wow, Steve. Good job.
I might regret it, but I have nothing.
Yeah, you can't double up next month now. I do have one question for the township solicitor. So there was some discussions with regards to the conditional use applications that were filed over on Campus Boulevard. I wanted to know if you could address, I know the township put out a statement, so I don't think much of the report's going to be different from that, but if you can kind of explain, where that application is, and then I'll probably have a follow-up or two for you after that.
So as you know, the township passed a zoning ordinance. It said no more R5 uses in SU1 districts, right? R5 being housing for the elderly, SU1 being more office-based, laboratory-based. And so when that was advertised, that triggered a couple property owners to say, we want to be able to protect our rights to be able to do this. So they put in conditional use applications, right? So 3 groups of properties, like three different entities with a couple properties each on Campus Boulevard came in with various applications to put multifamily housing for the elderly on Campus Boulevard. That's the process is it's a conditional use application, right? It's not a land development application. And zoning ordinance has changed. They have the right to continue on with the zoning ordinance at the time of application. And then if they get that approval, then they go on to land development. They have 6 months to go on and get land development process started or done under the old zoning rules. Okay, so that was done. That's been submitted to the township. Township administration reached out to the different landowners and just said, hey, it's a lot of multifamily, right? And all in one location. Have you given thought to other possible uses for the property? And they hadn't yet, but they agreed to look at it. And so they put their conditional use application process on hold. So they grant the township the relevant extensions, right? So for conditional use applications, first goes to our planning commission for review, and then a hearing has to start before the board of supervisors within 60 days. And then, within 100 days, you got to wrap up the hearings, essentially, right? There's all kind of qualifications. They granted the extension, so we didn't have to start those hearings right away while they investigate. And they'll come back to the administration. We'll have a discussion, see if there's anything more interesting that the board might be interested in. If there is, we'll report back. If not, eventually you're going to have a hearing.
And those deadlines that you mentioned are established in what?
the municipality's planning code, the MPC.
Thank you. And we keep saying conditional use. Can you explain high level conditional use?
High level, conditional use is essentially a right that's permitted in a zoning district. It's the zoning board equivalent is a special exception. So it's a use that's permitted, but you got to meet certain criteria, and the board can put certain criteria on there. There's limits on what you can put on, but like off premises traffic improvements, you really can't do much about that. But you can say, hey, if one of the things is, light can't escape a certain amount, you can put and they have lights on a parking lot. You can say, hey, you have to put certain types of lights on to make sure that it's the most advanced technology to stop light bleed into other areas. There's different conditions that you can put on to address specific criteria that you have in your conditional use standards, right, which is in your zoning code. And it's very similar to that, like I said, the special exception process in front of the zoning hearing board, except for the legislator maintain the jurisdiction instead of giving it to the zoning hearing.
And the legislature here would be the governing body, which is the Board of Supervisors.
That's right.
And so if one was to say, get rid of the conditional use process in the township for anything, we essentially lose control over being able to get, in your words, I don't want to say a better product, but the ability for the governing body or the township to impose conditions that could protect the surrounding.
Yeah, you had mentioned this, people were asking, why would we even have conditional uses? And yeah, that you're exactly right. The issue is, if anything, you want more conditional use, right? The problem is that just weighs down the administration, right? So if there's uses that are just permitted by right within a district, by adding that conditional use process, right? If there's a lot of motion and resources within the township that eats up. So typically people want more things by conditional use rather than less things by conditional use, because you have more control over that process as a board. So I'm not sure what those questions were getting at when they said, why would you want anything by conditional use? In fact, almost everything in the SU1 district is by conditional use, if not everything.
I think everything.
Yeah. That's the maximum control that you have as a board, is to maintain that. But you don't want to do that for everything. It would just suck up all your resources.
But the gist of it is that it protects, it allows the governing body to put in conditions as opposed to just something that's permitted by.
Yeah,
right.
it allows you to place specific criteria by which, additional criteria in addition to like land development standards, by which that proposed use is to be measured, not just the physical. So land development is really geared towards the physical aspects of the development. How much impervious coverage is there? And there's always overlap between physical and use, but setbacks, heights, most of those things are just set forth in your zoning code, and they're just hard numbers. And there's other criteria that you add for specific types of uses. Some are very specific. If you look at our special exception criteria for daycares in neighborhoods, I mean, there's a list of 30 very specific things that have to be met, in addition to more general things like not burdening traffic in the neighborhood, health, safety, welfare of the community, things like that. So the conditional use standards for this particular development aren't very specific. There's not a lot of specific check the box things, such as like daycare in a residential neighborhood, but it still gives you a lot of power as a board to influence what happens.
All right. Thank you. Move down to section 10, bills, 10.1. Can I get a motion to approve the payment on pre-approved check register dated March 12, 2024, totaling $485.78? Motion is made by Supervisor San Francisco, seconded by Supervisor Chanlis. Is there any board discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carries unanimously. 10.2. Can I get a motion approving the 2023 bills on check register A dated March 25th, 2024, totaling $8,439.62?
Second.
Motion is made by Supervisor Russo, seconded by Supervisor Roberts Lightcap. Is there any board discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carries unanimously. 10.3. Can I get a motion approving the 2024 bills on check register A dated March 25th, 2024, totaling $187,127.95?
Second.
Motion made by Supervisor Chandler, seconded by Supervisor San Francisco. Is there any board discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Section 11, developer release. 11.1, can I get a motion approving the $10,000 cash escrow release, the final release to Toll Brothers relative to the Ellis Townhomes. A separate escrow remains for engineering inspections.
Second.
Motion was made by Supervisor San Francisco, seconded by Supervisor Roberts Lightcap. Is there any board discussion?
Mr. Neese, is that Stantec releasing that money?
It is Stantec. If you'll recall, probably about 5 months ago, back in the fall, the only thing that was outstanding for that project was, I think it was lamp post, and the lamp posts were on back order. And so the lamp posts have come in, they've been installed, and that's what you're releasing, is the cash that you were holding in hand in case those did not get done. Those public improvements have been completed.
Okay.
And does the homeowners association, do they have any say in it, or do they give any kind of approval to it to make sure that, I know that Andy or one of our inspectors have gone out to see it, but.
Well, Stantec was your inspector
Oh,
on
the
that,
inspect, yep.
and it was based on what was in the land development plan.
Okay.
So the HOA couldn't go. I mean, if they negotiated something with the developer, they could do that, but
They
as
bought
long
it
as
when they bought the package.
that's what was determined
Okay.
when it was done.
Alrighty, thank you.
Any other board discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Section 12, new business, 12.1. Can I get a motion approving well, actually, what we'll do is we'll have Janet, you can come up and do your presentation, and then Supervisor Roberts Lightcap has a proclamation for you before us.
Thank you. Yes, good evening. I'm Janet Cravanis, 23 Paper Mill Road in Newtown Square. I am on the Environmental Advisory Council here, and I'm chair of our bird town. And I want to address the proclamation for tonight. So Newtown Township is a gold certified bird town, and our Board of Supervisors have been very supportive of efforts to educate our residents on sustainable practices for birds and people. Passing this lights out proclamation is an example of that commitment. Our community is on the Atlantic Flyway, and our Newtown Meadow Preserve has been designated as an important bird area by Audubon. During the migration season, while we are sleeping, millions of birds travel in the dark with flocks that can be seen on weather radar. 70% of birds in North America migrate, and more than 80 of them make this seasonal flight at night. Without the light of the sun, these travelers use the moon and the stars to navigate during their long journeys, which can span thousands of miles and traverse continents. Artificial light at night, which is called ALAN, can disrupt bird migration in a variety of ways, including disorienting birds from their routes and causing collisions with buildings, resulting in millions of bird fatalities each year. Others become confused, causing them to circle until dawn, leaving them weak and vulnerable. This proclamation will help our residents to understand how to use their lights responsibly, and especially to use warm light of 2200 kelvins outside, or less than 2200. And let the moon and stars guide our birds on their amazing journey. I encourage residents to follow the link on our Lights Out flyer, which was in this month's e-newsletter and is on the board right there that we see. And follow the link there to birdtownpa.org, lights and birds. And I want to thank you so much for supporting our birds.
Thank you, Janet. And before Supervisor Roberts Lightcap reads the proclamation, I think that you might have a plug for a bird walk that's coming up. Do you want to talk about that real quick?
We do on Global Bird Day, which is May the 11th. Garrett Williamson has invited us back to do a bird walk, and it will be led by Mike McGraw, who's a fabulous birder, and also Phil Whitner, who is vice chair of Birdtown, PA. So that's from 8 to 11. So I hope to see you all there.
And I know that our chairman, when he's, I think eventually he'd like to do one of those bird walks himself, to lead it. So I heard him chatting with Mike about it and all the birds, so.
Yes, and he's gotten his binoculars on.
Yeah.
I did get a new pair of binoculars.
I know, he's so
did.
excited about it. They are a lot of fun though, and they're very
Absolutely.
informative. So when you walk around in your own backyard and you're like, oh, I've heard that bird before. I might not remember it, so I'd have to call him and ask him what it was, yeah.
Well, come out on the
Yeah.
11th, because Mike will teach us how to recognize the sound. And so you'll have a wealth of information, fingertips.
So I'd like to read the Lights Out Proclamation, Newtown Township, Delaware County. Whereas Newtown Township was established as a bird town, Pennsylvania in 2022, and there are street signs promoting our dedication to the effort. And whereas most bird migration in the United States of America occurs in the spring between April 1st and May 31st, and in the fall between August 15th and November 15th. And whereas an estimated 1 billion birds are killed each year due to nighttime light pollution, and whereas bird migration is one of nature's greatest wonders, and whereas birds typically follow established flyways, which are routes that offer the best opportunities for rest and refueling along the way, and whereas Newtown Township is a part of the Atlantic Flyway used by migrating birds, and our Newtown Meadow Preserve is designated as an important bird area by the Audubon Society. And whereas more than 50 cities and states, including Philadelphia, participate in the Lights Out program initiated by the Audubon Society and its partners. And whereas there are readily available good alternatives to lighting that is dangerous to birds, with these safer options, including motion detectors for outdoor lighting, outdoor lights that are covered so the light goes downward, via use of for example, via the use of cutoff fixtures, lights on timers and dimmers, and warm colored lighting with correlated color temperatures, CCT, of less than or equal to 22 degrees Kelvins. Now therefore be it resolved, Newtown Township hereby proclaims its support of the Lights Out program, and thus encourages residents and commercial property owners to help birds migrate more safely by converting exterior lighting to warm lights of less than or equal to 2200 Kelvins, and voluntarily dimming, blocking, or turning off exterior lighting, or using motion detectors on outdoor lighting between the hours of 11 p.m. and 5 a.m. during the spring and fall migration dates of April 1 to May 31 and August 15 to November 15. And that's the proclamation.
Motion is made by Supervisor Roberts Lightcap. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Second by Supervisor Russo. Is there any board discussion? Congratulations again. All those in
Thank you.
favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, motion carries unanimously. Thank you, Janet.
Thank you very
Appreciate it.
much.
Thank you for all your work that you do for Newtown Township.
It is my passion and my pleasure.
Thank you. Okay. 12.2, consider forwarding to the Planning Commission and the Delaware County Planning Department for review an ordinance amending the zoning code to make no impact home businesses a permitted use in certain residential districts rather than by special exception. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion was made by Supervisor San Francisco, seconded by Supervisor Chanlis. Mr. Security, you want to talk about 12.2 and 12.3 together, and then we'll just vote on them individually? Or do you just want to talk about this one first? And no, 12.2 and 12.3, the low impact.
Yeah, so, these were the two the board had asked the administration to take a look at just various zoning issues throughout the township and make some recommendations. Just two that we looked at were, one, this came up with actually a resident who has a business registered at their house, but they're a traveling person, so they don't actually conduct business at the house at all. But under our code, they're required for a home-based business to come in and get a special exception approval from our zoning board. And it's, it's onerous. And so we have a business registration process. So now as people are registering these home-based businesses, they got to come in and they're almost getting punished for doing that. There's a difference between a no impact home-based business, which is literally just where your mailing address is, versus actually conducting some modest business there with significant restrictions, floor area restrictions, where you keep stuff and everything else. So our zoning code never made the distinction between no impact and small impact. And so all this does is separate the two, creates two different definitions. So you have the zero impact, which is just permitted by right, meaning reflecting the reality that a lot of people just work from a desk in their converted bedroom and don't have any impact on their own or other properties around them. They can just do that. And then separates that from other uses that actually do have a minor impact and have to meet very specific criteria, which already existed in the code, and that process stays the same. So it just split the two and made it less onerous for our residents for the true no impact. The second one is just the height of buildings. In the SU1 districts, back in 2013, the code had been amended to allow certain areas west of Winding Way in SU1 districts to be as high as 70 feet high. And I just know over the years, there's been concern raised from multiple supervisors, residents, planners about not liking that. So this just simply delete that 2013 amendment such that the highest building in an SU1 district would be 45 feet, except they can go up to 55 feet, but there's a setback increase to go. So that doesn't change.
Got it. Okay. So there was a motion made and seconded for 12.2. The motion was made by Supervisor, I believe, San Francisco, and seconded by Supervisor Chandler. So we'll take that one first. Is there any board discussion on that?
And I'm sorry, just the process, I should have said this too. The process is first it's reviewed by our planning commission and the Delaware County Planning Department. They get to weigh in. There's an advertising process, and then it comes back to you for adoption. So This is asking you to allow us to forward it to the relevant planning agencies and advertise it when they're okay with that.
And then it comes back, right? If
there's a change recommended by them, we come back and show you the change first, and then say, okay, can we advertise this? If there's no change, or essentially no change, de minimis, then we would just advertise it and bring it back to you.
And it's for both of them, right? For both of these.
Yes, yeah, but they're listed separately, so you got to approve each line.
Yep. All right, so for 12.2, any other board discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carries unanimously. 12.3, can I get a motion forwarding to the Planning Commission and the Delaware County Planning Commission for review an ordinance amending the zoning code related to building heights in the SU1 districts, deleting 172-92B that allowed 70 feet in certain locations?
So moved.
Second.
Motion was made by Supervisor Roberts Lightcap, seconded by Supervisor Russo. Is there any board discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries unanimously. 12.4, consider approving the advertising for bids associated with the Glendale Road stormwater improvements, which costs will be covered by grant dollars. Motion is made by Supervisor Russo, seconded by Supervisor Chandler. Is there any board discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries unanimously. 12.5, can I get a motion approving the backup solution upgrade from our current provider at no additional cost as recommended by our IT provider that will extend the current contract by 4 months?
Second.
Motion is made by Supervisor San Francisco, seconded by Supervisor Roberts Lightcap. Is there any board discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carries unanimously. 12.6, can I get a motion considering the $400 donation for the Historic Society's monthly themed program book, which will replace the one-day Historic Newtown Square event?
Second.
Motion is made by Supervisor Russo, seconded by Supervisor Chandler. Is there any board discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Section 13 is old business. There is no old business. Section 14 is board comment. Is there any board comment? The only thing I'll say is thank you to Supervisor Roberts Lightcap, Mr. Sikora, and Mr. Neese. We all spent, Mr. Sheriff was there, spent a Saturday at Drexel Lodge Park as part of the CRC Creek cleanup last weekend. And I know that the DCVA one is coming up that will take place over at Greer Park. And that's the one that Supervisor Russo likes to go over to the Pico area with his
What is
waiters
that?
on. I think it's April 9th, I think. I could be wrong on that. April 6th. So, all right, with that, then we'll move down to 15 public comment. Is there any members of the public who have anything? The podium, Mr. Glazer. Just state your name and address for the record, please.
Okay. Nathan Glazer, 3538 Cayley Road. I want to go back to the beginning when the various reports were being read, specifically the police report. Now, I did not read it in advance, so if I'm out of line, please tell me. I think the board demonstrates incredible disingenuousness with the fact that when you approve construction of retail and what like, everything goes with that. If there's a retail seller of something, there's going to be retail theft. If there are hotels, there's going to be problems related to being in a hotel. So when these things came to be and were approved, it was already there. And that was the time to deal with it. I think to come back now and to retroactively want to do things is less than a fair strategy. These are private businesses, and therefore their loss control is a private matter. It's not necessary for us to tell them what they should do.
It is our purview when you don't enforce security, and there's a lot of young women, girls, and mothers and single ladies going into that store that could be hurt in these altercations that they're not doing a damn thing about, Nate. So get into the program and figure out what's going on. They have theft after theft after theft. And my daughters happen to go there, and all their friends go there, and they're all high school kids.
Well,
What happens if that's going on when that's going on?
Whether they're women or anybody else is irrelevant. That's a ridiculous categorization because the problem could attack anybody. So please don't, create a discussion that's really meaningless. Now,
Meaningless.
yeah, because whether it's a woman or a man, it's meaningless. Then say that, but that's not what you said. You categorize this as a gender.
So let's do this. All right. We're gonna do this. We're gonna let you finish your public comment, and then if you all want to have a private conversation, you can have a private conversation.
We're not. We won't have that because I don't think it's to any point. Now,
I'm not going to listen to this.
Adios.
Someone's going to get hurt, and you know what? You don't want to look at it that way. It doesn't matter. Someone can get hurt there. It's happened month after month after month. They don't do anything about it. So somebody has to do something, Nate. We don't have crime in this town other than at the store.
I think that's a
You're
naive statement.
You're putting your head in the clouds and saying, oh, there's nothing happening here. Yeah, it is happening. It's happening on a continuous basis. This is not one time. This is continuous. They won't let their people call the police till after it happens. Why at a bank do you have a button when someone comes in, it's going to do something, you press the button and then the police come? That's what they should have there if they don't want to have a security guard. They don't want to do anything. They want to call afterwards, oh, we had a robbery. That's safety. That's a life safety issue. And I have a problem with it because if somebody in my family's there and that happens, I'm going to be more than pissed off.
And that's why we have courts with civil actions to deal with it. Society has a way of dealing with this problem, but it's not being paternalistic towards individual businesses. And that actually, and I don't want to get too ethereal, but the point is private property, private businesses are not the business of government to tell them how to run. They deal with the cost and they deal with the effects with their customers if they feel there's been a damage. Second part, and this is probably more emotional to me, was Lightcap. The idea of the fire company somehow getting involved in parking for
It was a joke. It was a joke.
Well, I think that's the kind of thinking though that creeps out. I've spent almost 50 years as a first responder. I was doing it before some of you were born. And this is a typical approach to how do we deal with something. It's unacceptable to even verbalize the idea that public safety officials should be getting involved in being a small-time parking. I've heard this before here. It doesn't belong here.
No, it was a joke because what is going to happen is because the firehouse is directly across the street from the catering hall, they're going to be impacted by it. So they're going to have, and it was, I guess there can be no levity in the world anymore. So you offend somebody when you say something. And Chief understood what I was saying, because across the street, people want to park the closest to the front door. They don't care that it's the firehouse. They're gonna park there and they're gonna be impacted by it. It was a joke, Mr. Glazer, and I'm sorry that if I offended you, and we appreciate your service as a first responder, and it was a joke. So I will never make that mistake again. So thank you.
Now, to conclude, the real place to solve this problem, and I know it's a very difficult one, is to put on impact fees or impact statements when this business comes in. So if there's a reasonable knowledge or reasonable expectation that something is going to happen, then do it up front and tell.
We
what?
can't with a hotel. A hotel, we cannot charge any tax. Mr. Sikora will tell you, and Mr. Neese will tell you, we cannot charge a tax because only the county can charge the tax.
No,
we
but
are
what?
impacted. We are impacted by that.
But impact fees exist. When the developer says, I'm going to build a hotel, it's potential at that point, not as a
You can do
tax.
that, correct, Mr. Sikora?
We could have. There's specific things under the NPC that you can get fees in lieu of certain things, such as we have many instances where recreational lands can be required by the ordinance, and you can't provide enough recreational lands on site to make a difference. Fee in lieu of recreational lands, but no, the law does not allow you to simply arbitrarily pick and choose what you want people to pay. You just, unfortunately, there'd be a lot of things that we'd like to focus on and say, hey, well, you should have to pay for this and you should have to pay for that, but there's really not a lot of wiggle room to be able to do that.
And the point I was trying to make with the hotel is that the hotel's got a finite tax base, right? It's got a property tax. Now, the police probably go there 100 times more than they would go to a house or houses that pay that same kind of tax. So it impacts us, and we don't have any recourse. I was just asking, I was trying to be proactive to have us have the fire and the police department have a conversation so that everyone is on the same page. That was all. We are stuck with this development. I voted against it. We're stuck with it. I'm trying to make the best of it.
Any other public comment, Mr. Glazer? Thank you very much. Any other members of the public who have public comment? Ma'am? Name and address, please.
Hi, my name is Roz Vetta, and I live at 3673 Viola Drive. And I just wanted to bring to the attention of the board that Ulta, the problem with Ulta is actually a nationwide problem, and they're being targeted. There was a recent story on the national news. They're being targeted, and young women are the ones who are stealing from Ulta, and they found multiple businesses that are reselling the stolen property on Amazon, it was. So Ulta is being targeted, and it's bigger than Newtown Square, Ulta. Just to let you know, that was all I wanted to say.
Appreciate
Thank
that. Thank you.
Comment.
Thank you. Any other members of the public comment? All right, the only thing I would just like to add is kind of what Supervisor Roberts Lightcap said is, and this is not going to be a back and forth, but the majority of this board, the vast majority of this board are dealing with essentially the sins of our fathers when it comes to a lot of these pre-approved development projects that none of us had anything to do with. And I just think it's important for us to continue that, to remember that context, that none of us were around when those original approvals were granted. And now we're seeing the sins of our fathers on that. So